Behind the gilded doors of royal palaces, every meal tells a story that could change the course of history. A simple placement of a fork speaks louder than any declaration of war. The angle of a wineglass can signal the rise or fall of a prime minister. And, when the Queen herself breaks protocol at her own dinner table, the ripple effects reach far beyond the palace walls. For centuries, the world's most powerful families have communicated through an intricate code of dining etiquette so complex that a single misplaced napkin could spark international incidents. These aren't mere table manners, they're the hidden language of power, where every gesture carries weight and every pause holds meaning. What you're about to discover will forever change how you view those carefully orchestrated state dinners and formal royal occasions. Behind the polished silver and crystal glasses lies a world of secret signals, where the fate of nations hangs in the balance of who sits where, who speaks when, and who dares to reach for their water glass first. This is the true story of how the most guarded secrets of royalty are shared not through whispered conversations or encrypted messages, but through the silent choreography of formal dining, where a queen's subtle gesture can topple governments, and a prince's dining choice can prevent wars. The chandelier cast dancing shadows across the polished mahogany table as Queen Isabella of Valdoria adjusted her pearl bracelet with practiced precision. To the untrained eye, it appeared to be a simple nervous gesture. To the 12 ambassadors seated around the table that evening in March 2019, it was the first signal of what would become known as the Midnight Accord crisis. Ambassador Qin Wei of the People's Republic of China noticed the movement immediately. His training in diplomatic protocols had taught him to watch for such subtle communications, but even he couldn't have predicted the cascade of events that would unfold from this single moment. The Queen's bracelet adjustment meant one thing according to the ancient dining codes passed down through generations of European royalty: immediate attention required, highest priority. The formal dining room of the Palace of Valdoria had witnessed countless historical moments, but none quite like this. The table itself was a masterpiece of diplomatic positioning, with each seat carefully chosen to reflect current international relationships. Ambassador Chen sat 3 seats to the Queen's right, a position that indicated cautious cooperation. Across from him, Russian Ambassador Dmitry Volkov occupied the challenging left side placement, suggesting ongoing tensions but willingness to dialogue. Mrs. Sarah Blackwood, the palace protocol officer, had spent 3 weeks planning this seating arrangement. Every inch of space had meaning, every angle calculated for maximum diplomatic effect. She stood silently near the servants' entrance, watching as the evening's carefully orchestrated plan began to unfold. Her tablet contained detailed notes about each guest's dietary restrictions, political leanings, and, most importantly, their understanding of royal dining protocols. The Queen reached for her water glass with her left hand instead of her right. Ambassador Chen's breath caught slightly as he recognized the signal. This particular gesture, known only to the highest levels of diplomatic circles, indicated that classified information would be shared before the evening concluded. He discreetly touched his napkin to his lips twice, confirming his understanding and readiness to receive whatever message the Queen intended to convey. Prince Alexander, heir to the Valdorian throne, sat at the far end of the table observing the subtle exchanges with growing concern. At 28 years old, he had been training in these ancient communication methods since childhood, but tonight felt different. The tension in his mother's posture suggested something beyond routine diplomatic courtesy. He noticed she hadn't touched her soup, despite it being her favorite preparation of butternut squash with truffle oil. The first course proceeded with measured precision. Each diplomatic guest followed the unwritten rule of waiting for the Queen to take her first bite before beginning their own meals. But, when Queen Isabella placed her spoon down after only one sip, the message was unmistakable. According to royal dining protocol established in 1823, this action indicated that urgent business would supersede social pleasantries. French Ambassador Marie Dubois, seated to the Queen's immediate left, understood the gravity of the moment. Her own government had briefed her on possible scenarios for this dinner, but the Queen's behavior suggested none of their predictions were accurate. She carefully adjusted her wineglass, rotating it exactly 45 degrees clockwise, a signal requesting clarification on the urgency level of whatever announcement was coming. The Queen's response came through her choice of cutlery for the second course. Instead of using the silver fish fork designated for the evening's main dish, she selected the smaller appetizer fork. This seemingly minor deviation from proper etiquette sent a clear message to those who understood the language: the matter at hand concerned individual nations rather than collective international interests. Ambassador Volkov felt his pulse quicken as he deciphered the Queen's signals. His intelligence briefings had mentioned possible developments regarding the disputed territories in Eastern Europe, but he hadn't expected them to be addressed at a formal dinner. He glanced toward his aide, positioned discreetly near the wall, and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Within minutes, secure communications would be established with Moscow to alert them of potential developments. The conversation thus far had been limited to pleasantries about the weather, cultural exchanges, and compliments on the palace's recent restoration. But each diplomat present knew that the real communication was happening through gestures, positioning, and the careful choreography of formal dining. The Queen's next move would determine the direction of the evening's hidden agenda. As the second course was served, Queen Isabella made her most significant gesture yet. She placed her hands flat on the table for exactly 3 seconds before reaching for her wine. This action, encoded in diplomatic tradition dating back to the Congress of Vienna, indicated that a major international agreement was about to be discussed. The specific duration of the gesture suggested that the agreement would be presented for immediate consideration rather than future negotiation. Ambassador Chen found himself in an impossible position. His government's instructions were clear: any major agreements required consultation with Beijing before acceptance. But the Queen's signals indicated that tonight's discussion would require immediate responses. He carefully placed his own hands on the table, mirroring the Queen's earlier gesture but holding the position for only 2 seconds. This diplomatic response indicated his willingness to listen but inability to commit without higher authorization. The tension around the table became palpable as each ambassador processed the implications of what they were witnessing. This wasn't merely a formal dinner, it was the opening of negotiations that could reshape international relationships across multiple continents. The Queen's choice to communicate through dining protocols rather than official channels suggested that whatever was about to be proposed existed outside normal diplomatic frameworks. Prince Alexander watched his mother with growing admiration. Her mastery of these ancient communication methods was absolute, each gesture executed with precision born of decades of training and natural intelligence. He could see the respect in the ambassador's eyes as they struggled to keep pace with her sophisticated messaging. This was diplomacy at its highest level, conducted through a language so subtle that most of the world remained completely unaware of its existence. The servants moved through their duties with practiced efficiency, each one trained to recognize and accommodate the unique requirements of diplomatic dining. They understood that their role extended beyond serving food. They were participants in a carefully choreographed performance where even the timing of plate removal could affect international relations. Head butler James Morrison had overseen hundreds of such dinners, but even he could sense that tonight was extraordinary. As the main course was presented, Queen Isabella made her most surprising move yet. She requested that her portion be served on the china pattern reserved for state occasions rather than the more casual diplomatic setting originally selected. This change in protocol indicated that whatever was about to be discussed had already been elevated to the level of official state business. The ambassadors understood that any agreements reached during the remainder of the evening would carry the full weight of their respective governments. Ambassador Dubois felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her instructions from Paris had prepared her for routine diplomatic exchanges, but the Queen's escalating signals indicated that significant decisions would be required before the evening concluded. She discreetly activated a small device in her purse, sending a coded message to the French Foreign Ministry alerting them to the unexpected developments. The Queen's next action surprised everyone present. She stood briefly, ostensibly to compliment the chef, but her movement served a dual purpose. In royal dining protocol, standing during a seated dinner indicated that the host was about to reveal information that would fundamentally alter the evening's proceedings. The ambassadors exchanged subtle glances, each calculating the potential implications for their own nation's interests. When Queen Isabella resumed her seat, she placed her napkin in a position none of them had seen before. Rather than the traditional placement across her lap, she folded it carefully and set it to the right of her plate. Ambassador Chen consulted his mental catalogue of diplomatic protocols but found no reference for this particular gesture. The Queen was either creating new protocol on the spot or invoking something so ancient and rarely used that none of them recognized it. Prince Alexander leaned forward slightly, his concern now openly visible. His mother's behavior was unprecedented in his experience, suggesting that whatever intelligence had prompted tonight's dinner was far more serious than anyone had anticipated. He caught her eye briefly and saw the steely determination that had made her one of Europe's most respected monarchs. Whatever was coming, she was prepared for it. The room fell silent as Queen Isabella reached for her wineglass one final time before speaking. Her fingers traced the rim clockwise 3 times, a gesture that, according to the most ancient protocols, indicated that the information she was about to share would change the balance of power among the nations represented at her table. The age of polite diplomatic conversation was about to end, and the real business of international relations was about to begin. As she set the glass down and looked directly at each ambassador in turn, Queen Isabella smiled slightly. The first phase of the evening's communication was complete. Now came the moment when words would finally be spoken, and the carefully laid foundation of silent signals would support the most important international negotiation of the decade. The fate of 3 nations hung in the balance, and it all began with the adjustment of a pearl bracelet. The words that followed Queen Isabella's elaborate preparation came as a shock to even the most seasoned diplomats present. She began not with the expected formal announcement, but with a seemingly casual observation about the evening's menu selections. To anyone overhearing the conversation, her comments about the locally sourced ingredients and traditional cooking methods would seem like polite dinner conversation. But each ambassador understood they were receiving coded information about resource allocation and territorial boundaries that could redefine international relationships for decades to come. Ambassador Chen found himself struggling to process the layers of meaning embedded in the Queen's carefully chosen words. When she mentioned the exceptional quality of the root vegetables grown in the eastern valleys, she was actually referring to the rare earth mineral deposits recently discovered along the disputed border between Valdoria and its neighboring nation of Astoria. His training had prepared him for complex diplomatic communications, but this level of sophistication exceeded anything in his previous experience. The discovery of these mineral deposits had been classified at the highest levels for months. Only a select few individuals in each government were aware that the geological surveys had revealed resources potentially worth trillions of dollars. The Queen's decision to address this information through dining protocol rather than official channels suggested that she had developed a solution to the territorial dispute that couldn't be discussed through normal diplomatic means. Prince Alexander observed the increasing tension around the table as his mother continued her seemingly innocent commentary on the dinner preparations. When she praised the innovative preservation techniques that maintained the natural properties of the seasonal harvest, she was actually describing a proposed international framework for resource extraction that would benefit all parties involved. The complexity of communicating such detailed information through culinary metaphors demonstrated why these ancient protocols had survived centuries of political upheaval. Ambassador Volkov felt perspiration gathering despite the cool temperature of the dining room. His government's position on the Valdoria-Astoria territorial dispute had been clearly stated through official channels. Russia would support whatever resolution best served regional stability. But the Queen's coded message suggested that the proposed solution would require specific commitments from Moscow that hadn't been previously discussed. He needed guidance from his superiors, but the evening's protocol made it impossible to leave for private consultation. The Queen's next revelation came through her selection of wine for the third course. Instead of continuing with the French vintage that had been served throughout the evening, she requested a specific bottle from her personal collection. The wine in question was a 1987 Valdorian Reserve, produced during the year when the current territorial agreements were originally signed. This choice indicated that her proposal would involve renegotiating those foundational treaties rather than simply modifying existing arrangements. Mrs. Blackwood watched from her position near the wall as the diplomatic complexity of the evening escalated beyond anything in her professional experience. Her role as protocol officer typically involved ensuring proper etiquette and managing logistical details. Tonight, however, she found herself witnessing negotiations that could reshape the political landscape of 3 nations. The responsibility of maintaining perfect protocol became even more critical as the stakes continued to rise. Ambassador Dubois recognized the significance of the Queen's wine selection immediately. The 1987 Reserve had been produced specifically to commemorate the peaceful resolution of the previous territorial dispute. Its symbolic importance couldn't be overstated, and the Queen's choice to serve it tonight indicated that she viewed her current proposal as equally historic. The pressure to respond appropriately to such a momentous gesture weighed heavily on each diplomat present. As the wine was poured, Queen Isabella made another subtle but significant gesture. She lifted her glass in what appeared to be a casual toast to international friendship, but the specific height and angle of her gesture conveyed additional meaning to those who understood the ancient protocols. The positioning indicated that her proposal would require unanimous agreement from all nations present rather than simple majority approval. The implications of this requirement sent a ripple of concern around the table. Unanimous agreement in international negotiations was notoriously difficult to achieve, particularly when significant resources and territorial boundaries were involved. Each ambassador began calculating whether their government would be willing to commit to unknown terms without the safety net of partial implementation or gradual rollout procedures. Prince Alexander noticed his mother's increasing confidence as the evening progressed. Her gestures became more pronounced, her voice carried greater authority, and her eye contact with each ambassador grew more direct. She was building toward something significant, using each course and each protocol element to establish the foundation for what would clearly be the evening's climactic revelation. His own understanding of these communication methods allowed him to appreciate the masterful performance he was witnessing. The third course arrived with unprecedented ceremony. Rather than the standard service protocol, the dishes were presented by the head chef personally, accompanied by detailed explanations of preparation methods and ingredient sources. This deviation from normal procedure served as another layer of coded communication, with each culinary detail representing specific aspects of the proposed international agreement. Ambassador Chen realized that the chef's description of the delicate balance of traditional and modern techniques was actually outlining a governance structure for managing the disputed territories. The proposal involved maintaining existing local authorities while introducing new international oversight mechanisms. The complexity of conveying such detailed governmental structures through culinary metaphors demonstrated the sophistication of royal dining communications. The Queen's response to the chef's presentation provided additional crucial information. Her compliments focused specifically on the seamless integration of diverse ingredients while preserving individual character, indicating that the proposed agreement would maintain each nation's sovereignty while creating new frameworks for cooperation. This balance between independence and collaboration represented exactly the kind of solution that could satisfy all parties involved. As the chef withdrew, Queen Isabella made her most dramatic gesture yet. She removed her pearl bracelet entirely, placing it carefully beside her plate in a position where all ambassadors could see it clearly. This action, according to the most advanced diplomatic protocols, indicated that she was about to reveal information that would require immediate decision-making from each representative government. The evening was about to transition from subtle communication to direct negotiation. Ambassador Volkov felt his training and experience converging as he prepared for what was clearly going to be the evening's crucial moment. His ability to respond appropriately to whatever proposal emerged would determine Russia's position in the new international framework being outlined through the Queen's elaborate communications. The weight of representing his nation's interests in such an unprecedented situation pressed heavily on his shoulders. The Queen began her formal proposal by referencing the unique opportunity presented by tonight's gathering. Her words, while still maintaining the facade of casual dinner conversation, carried unmistakable diplomatic weight. She outlined a three-phase implementation plan for joint administration of the disputed territories, with each nation taking primary responsibility for different aspects of resource development and management. Phase 1 involved establishing joint scientific committees to oversee extraction operations and environmental protection measures. The Queen's description of this phase used agricultural metaphors about careful cultivation to ensure long-term productivity, but the ambassadors understood she was describing sustainable resource extraction that would benefit all parties while preserving regional ecosystems. Phase 2 called for rotating administrative authority among the three nations, with 5-year terms and specific performance metrics for regional development and international cooperation. The Queen presented this concept through discussions of seasonal management techniques that optimize harvest timing, maintaining the culinary theme while outlining a sophisticated governmental structure. Phase 3 established permanent international oversight mechanisms with representatives from each nation plus neutral observers from the United Nations and European Union. The Queen described this as creating stable storage and distribution systems that ensure quality preservation, but the ambassadors recognized it as a framework for long-term conflict prevention and resource management. Ambassador Dubois found herself simultaneously impressed by the proposal's elegance and concerned about her government's ability to accept such extensive commitments without proper consultation. The Queen's use of dining protocols to present the agreement created a situation where formal diplomatic rejection would be nearly impossible without causing significant international embarrassment. The pressure to accept or propose modifications was enormous. Prince Alexander watched as his mother concluded her proposal with a gesture that demonstrated her complete mastery of diplomatic communication. She raised her wineglass one final time, holding it at precisely the angle that indicated formal completion of international negotiations. The gesture transformed the evening from exploratory discussion to binding diplomatic commitment, assuming each ambassador chose to respond positively. The silence that followed was profound. Each diplomat understood that their response would determine not only their nation's relationship with Valdoria but also the broader framework for international cooperation in resource management and territorial dispute resolution. The Queen had presented a solution so comprehensive and equitable that rejection would be difficult to justify, yet acceptance required commitments that exceeded their individual authority. Ambassador Chen was the first to respond, carefully lifting his own glass to match the Queen's angle exactly. This gesture indicated preliminary acceptance pending government approval, a response that maintained diplomatic courtesy while preserving his nation's need for internal consultation. His action provided a model for the other ambassadors to follow while avoiding immediate commitment to unknown terms. The evening had transformed from routine diplomatic dinner to historic international negotiation, all conducted through the ancient language of royal dining protocols. As each ambassador prepared their response to the Queen's proposal, they understood they were participating in a form of diplomacy that represented centuries of tradition while addressing thoroughly modern challenges. Ambassador Volkov's response came through a gesture so subtle that only the most experienced diplomatic observers would have noticed it. Instead of lifting his wine glass to match the Queen's position, he rotated it exactly 90 degrees counterclockwise while maintaining its position on the table. This sophisticated signal indicated partial acceptance of the proposal with reservations requiring clarification on specific implementation details. The Queen's slight nod acknowledged his response and indicated her willingness to address his concerns before the evening concluded. The complexity of the three-way negotiation taking place through dining protocols pushed the boundaries of what even experienced diplomats considered possible. Each gesture, each pause, each selection of cutlery carried multiple layers of meaning that had to be processed simultaneously while maintaining the appearance of casual dinner conversation. Mrs. Blackwood found herself documenting the exchange through discreet notes, recognizing that she was witnessing diplomatic history in the making. Ambassador Dubois chose a different approach entirely. Rather than responding through wineglass positioning, she carefully adjusted her napkin placement to indicate her government's interest in exploring the proposal further while requesting additional technical information. Her gesture specifically asked for clarification on the environmental protection measures mentioned in Phase 1 of the Queen's plan. The sophisticated nature of her request demonstrated France's commitment to sustainable development practices in any international resource management agreement. The Queen's ability to address multiple simultaneous diplomatic inquiries through dining protocol showcased decades of training and natural diplomatic intelligence. Her response to Ambassador Dubois involved selecting different pieces of silverware for each course detail she wished to emphasize. The choice of a smaller fork for the salad course indicated that environmental measures would be implemented gradually but consistently. Her selection of a specialty knife for the cheese course suggested that enforcement mechanisms would have significant legal authority. Prince Alexander observed the intricate dance of international diplomacy with growing appreciation for his mother's skills and growing concern about the evening's ultimate outcome. The proposal she had outlined represented a revolutionary approach to territorial dispute resolution, but its success depended entirely on achieving unanimous agreement among three nations with historically complex relationships. The pressure of the moment was evident in the careful attention each ambassador paid to every detail of protocol and procedure. Ambassador Chen's next response demonstrated his sophisticated understanding of both diplomatic protocol and international law. He placed his water glass in a position that indicated his government's willingness to accept the proposal's basic framework while requesting modifications to the timeline for implementation. Specifically, his gesture suggested that China would prefer a 7-year rotation for administrative authority rather than the 5-year terms originally proposed. This modification would allow each nation more time to develop expertise and establish effective management systems. The Queen's consideration of this timeline modification revealed another layer of the evening's diplomatic complexity. Her response involved a carefully orchestrated series of hand movements while discussing the aging process required for optimal flavor development in the evening's wine selection. To outside observers, she appeared to be sharing interesting details about wine production. To the ambassadors present, she was outlining flexible implementation schedules that could accommodate each nation's internal political requirements while maintaining the proposal's overall integrity. The fourth course arrived with additional symbolic significance that only became apparent as the Queen began explaining the preparation methods. The dish featured ingredients from all three nations involved in the territorial dispute, combined using cooking techniques that preserved each component's individual characteristics while creating a harmonious final result. This culinary metaphor reinforced her proposal's central theme, maintaining national sovereignty while achieving beneficial international cooperation. Ambassador Volkov recognized the sophisticated symbolism but remained focused on practical implementation challenges. His next gesture involved placing his bread plate in a position that indicated Russia's concern about potential security implications of joint territorial administration. His signal specifically requested clarification on military presence and border control responsibilities under the proposed agreement. These concerns reflected Moscow's broader strategic interests in maintaining regional influence while participating in international cooperation frameworks. The Queen's response to security concerns demonstrated her thorough preparation for every aspect of the evening's negotiations. She began discussing the careful balance of preservation and accessibility required for the evening's bread service, using bakery metaphors to outline a security framework that would satisfy each nation's defense requirements. Her proposal involved shared intelligence operations and coordinated border management while maintaining each country's independent military authority within their assigned administrative zones. Mrs. Blackwood noticed that the conversation had attracted subtle attention from the service staff, despite their professional training to remain focused on their duties. The historical significance of the evening's negotiations was apparent even to those who couldn't fully understand the coded communications taking place. She made additional notes about staff management and security protocols that would need to be implemented if similar negotiations occurred in the future. The Queen's mastery of the ancient dining protocols became even more apparent as she began addressing multiple diplomatic concerns simultaneously. Her discussion of dessert wine selections provided coded responses to 3 different questions that had been posed through ambassador gestures during the previous course. She confirmed that international observers would have full access to resource extraction data, that environmental protection measures would be binding under international law, and that each nation would retain veto power over major policy decisions affecting their administrative zones. Ambassador Dubois felt a growing sense of optimism as the Queen's responses addressed many of France's primary concerns about the proposed agreement. The environmental protection measures were more comprehensive than anything she had expected, and the governance structure seemed designed to prevent the kind of exploitation that had characterized previous international resource management projects. Her next gesture involved a subtle adjustment to her jewelry that indicated preliminary approval pending final review of implementation timelines and legal frameworks. The complexity of conducting detailed international negotiations through dining protocol began to strain even the most experienced diplomats present. Ambassador Chen found himself consulting mental notes about gesture meanings while simultaneously processing new information about resource allocation percentages and administrative responsibilities. The cognitive demands of the evening exceeded anything in his previous experience, yet the importance of achieving successful agreement motivated continued engagement with the process. Prince Alexander noticed that his mother's confidence continued to grow as each ambassador's responses indicated serious consideration of her proposal. Her gestures became more expansive, her voice carried greater authority, and her eye contact with each diplomat conveyed increasing conviction about the agreement's potential for success. She was building momentum toward what would clearly be the evening's final decision point, when each ambassador would need to provide definitive responses on behalf of their governments. The arrival of the evening's dessert course signaled the transition to the final phase of negotiations. The Queen's selection of a traditional Valdorian pastry with modern presentation techniques served as another metaphor for her proposal's combination of historical diplomatic principles with innovative international cooperation methods. Her explanation of the dessert's preparation provided additional details about implementation schedules and performance measurement systems that would ensure the agreement's long-term success. Ambassador Volkov's response to the dessert presentation indicated Russia's increasing comfort with the proposed framework. His gesture involving careful arrangement of dessert utensils signaled acceptance of the basic proposal while requesting final clarifications on technology transfer arrangements and intellectual property protection for resource extraction innovations. These concerns reflected Moscow's interest in ensuring that participation in the agreement would enhance rather than compromise Russia's technological capabilities. The Queen's final substantive response of the evening came through her choice of coffee service. Instead of the standard diplomatic blend typically served at formal dinners, she requested a special mixture that combined beans from regions associated with each nation involved in the negotiations. This symbolic gesture indicated her confidence that the evening's discussions had established the foundation for successful long-term cooperation among all parties involved. As coffee was served, each ambassador understood that the negotiation phase of the evening was concluding. Their remaining communications would focus on establishing procedures for formal government review and approval of the proposed agreement. The Queen's sophisticated use of dining protocols had succeeded in creating a framework for international cooperation that addressed each nation's primary concerns while establishing mechanisms for addressing future challenges. The transition from negotiation to conclusion required its own specialized protocols. The Queen's gesture of personally serving cream to each ambassador indicated her commitment to supporting the agreement through any implementation challenges that might arise. Her willingness to take personal responsibility for the proposal's success added significant weight to the commitments being requested from each government. Ambassador Chen's acceptance of the offered cream service indicated China's fundamental agreement with the proposal's structure and implementation timeline. His additional gesture of requesting a second serving suggested that Beijing would be prepared to provide additional resources beyond the minimum requirements if necessary to ensure the agreement's success. This commitment exceeded his original negotiating authority but reflected the exceptional nature of the opportunity being presented. The evening was approaching its formal conclusion, but the most critical moments still lay ahead. Each ambassador would need to provide their final response to the Queen's proposal, understanding that their gestures would be interpreted as preliminary commitments that would guide their government's formal decision-making processes in the days ahead. The moment of final commitment arrived with the presentation of after-dinner brandy. Queen Isabella's choice of a rare 1945 vintage held profound symbolic significance that resonated with each diplomat present. This particular brandy had been produced during the final year of World War II, representing the transition from global conflict to international cooperation. Her selection indicated that tonight's agreement would mark a similarly historic transformation in how territorial disputes could be resolved through diplomatic innovation rather than military confrontation. Ambassador Chen understood that his next gesture would determine China's relationship not only with Valdoria but, potentially, with the entire framework of international resource management for decades to come. The Queen's proposal offered unprecedented access to rare earth minerals critical for technological advancement, but it required commitments to environmental protection and international oversight that exceeded anything Beijing had previously accepted. His training in diplomatic protocol had prepared him for complex negotiations, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of this decision. As he lifted the brandy snifter, Ambassador Chen made the gesture that would be remembered in diplomatic circles for generations. Instead of the traditional toast position, he held the glass at an angle that indicated full acceptance of the Queen's proposal with enthusiasm for immediate implementation. This response exceeded his original negotiating authority, but the exceptional nature of the opportunity justified extraordinary diplomatic flexibility. His gesture committed China to supporting the agreement through whatever additional negotiations might be required. Ambassador Volkov felt the full weight of Russian strategic interests pressing on his shoulders as he prepared his own response. The Queen's proposal offered significant benefits for Russian technology development and regional influence, but it required cooperation with international oversight mechanisms that Moscow typically avoided. His government's instructions had emphasized the importance of maintaining strategic flexibility while pursuing beneficial economic opportunities. The brandy service provided the perfect protocol framework for communicating Russia's complex position. His response came through a sophisticated combination of gestures that demonstrated mastery of advanced diplomatic communication. Volkov lifted his brandy glass to match Ambassador Chen's angle, indicating basic acceptance of the proposal. However, he then rotated the glass slightly while maintaining the elevated position, signaling that Russia's participation would require specific modifications to the oversight mechanisms outlined in Phase 3 of the Queen's plan. This nuanced response preserved Russian sovereignty concerns while expressing genuine interest in the agreement's potential benefits. The Queen's acknowledgement of Ambassador Volkov's conditional acceptance revealed another dimension of her diplomatic expertise. Rather than viewing his request for modifications as rejection or delay, she recognized it as an opportunity to strengthen the overall agreement through addressing legitimate sovereignty concerns. Her response involved a subtle adjustment to her own brandy glass position that indicated willingness to negotiate specific oversight mechanisms while maintaining the fundamental principles of international cooperation and transparency. Ambassador Dubois found herself in the enviable position of representing a government whose interests aligned closely with the Queen's proposal as originally presented. France's commitment to environmental protection, international law, and sustainable development made participation in the agreement an obvious choice from both strategic and ethical perspectives. However, the weight of providing the final response that would complete unanimous acceptance created its own unique pressure. Her gesture was elegant in its simplicity and profound in its implications. Ambassador Dubois lifted her brandy glass to precisely match the positions chosen by her colleagues, then, added her own modification by briefly touching the glass to her lips before returning it to the elevated position. This additional element indicated not only acceptance but enthusiasm for immediate implementation without further modifications. Her response provided the unanimous agreement that the Queen's proposal required while expressing confidence in the framework's ability to address all participating nations' interests. Prince Alexander felt a surge of pride as he witnessed his mother's diplomatic triumph. The evening had demonstrated royal diplomacy at its finest, combining centuries of tradition with innovative solutions to thoroughly modern challenges. The unanimous acceptance of her proposal would reshape international relations in ways that extended far beyond the immediate territorial dispute. His own understanding of these communication methods allowed him to appreciate the masterful performance he had witnessed. The Queen's response to achieving unanimous agreement was characteristically graceful and strategically astute. Rather than celebrating the diplomatic victory, she immediately began outlining the practical steps that would transform the evening's preliminary agreements into binding international commitments. Her discussion of the careful storage and aging processes required for the evening's brandy selection actually described the legal and administrative procedures that would be needed to formalize the territorial management agreement. Mrs. Blackwood realized that her role was about to expand dramatically beyond traditional protocol management. The agreements reached during the evening would require unprecedented coordination between royal diplomatic channels and formal government treaty processes. Her documentation of the evening's communications would become crucial reference material for the international legal teams that would draft the formal agreement language in the weeks ahead. The transition from preliminary agreement to implementation planning required its own specialized protocols. The Queen's gesture of personally refilling each ambassador's brandy glass indicated her commitment to maintaining personal involvement throughout the implementation process rather than delegating responsibility to subordinate diplomatic staff. This level of royal engagement would provide significant political weight to support the agreement through any challenges that might arise during the formal ratification process. Ambassador Chen's acceptance of the second brandy serving indicated China's willingness to provide additional resources and political support beyond the minimum requirements outlined in the original proposal. His gesture specifically suggested that Beijing would be prepared to accelerate its own internal approval processes to facilitate rapid implementation of the territorial management framework. This commitment to expedited ratification could reduce the typical treaty approval timeline from years to months. The sophisticated nature of the evening's communications created unique challenges for formal documentation and legal implementation. The agreements reached through dining protocol would need to be translated into conventional diplomatic language while preserving the nuanced commitments and modifications that had been negotiated through gesture and symbol. This translation process would require lawyers and diplomats familiar with both traditional treaty language and royal communication protocols. Ambassador Volkov's participation in the brandy service ritual completed his acceptance of the modified agreement framework. His final gesture involved a subtle toast directed specifically at the Queen, acknowledging her personal role in creating a diplomatic solution that satisfied all parties' fundamental interests. This recognition of royal diplomacy's effectiveness would strengthen Valdoria's position in future international negotiations and enhance Queen Isabella's reputation as a skilled mediator. The Queen's reciprocal toast acknowledged each ambassador's courage in accepting unprecedented commitments on behalf of their governments. Her gesture recognized that tonight's agreements required each diplomat to exceed their original negotiating authority based on confidence in their government's willingness to support innovative diplomatic solutions. This mutual recognition of diplomatic risk-taking created bonds of professional respect that would support implementation of the agreement through whatever challenges might arise. Ambassador Dubois understood that France's enthusiastic support for the agreement would be remembered in international diplomatic circles as evidence of French leadership in sustainable resource management and conflict resolution. Her government's willingness to embrace innovative cooperation frameworks would enhance France's influence in future international negotiations involving environmental protection and territorial disputes. The diplomatic capital gained through tonight's agreement would provide benefits extending far beyond the immediate resource access. As the brandy service concluded, each participant understood that they had witnessed and participated in a transformation of international diplomacy itself. The Queen's successful use of dining protocols to negotiate complex agreements demonstrated that ancient traditions could be adapted to address thoroughly modern challenges. The evening's success would inspire similar innovations in diplomatic communication and provide a model for resolving territorial disputes through cooperation rather than confrontation. The formal conclusion of the evening's negotiations approached with the Queen's final protocol gesture. Her decision to personally escort each ambassador to the palace's main entrance represented the highest level of diplomatic honor and indicated her confidence that the evening's agreements would survive the formal ratification process. This personal attention from the monarch would provide each diplomat with significant political advantages when presenting the agreement to their respective governments. Prince Alexander accompanied his mother and the departing ambassadors, understanding that his presence added additional symbolic weight to the evening's commitments. His participation in the concluding protocols indicated royal family unity in support of the agreement and suggested that implementation would continue through future generations regardless of potential changes in government or political circumstances. This long-term stability assurance addressed one of the most common concerns in international resource management agreements. The evening that had begun with subtle adjustments to a pearl bracelet concluded with handshakes that would reshape international relations for decades to come. Each ambassador departed with preliminary commitments that exceeded their original authority but reflected the exceptional nature of the opportunity they had been offered. The Queen's mastery of diplomatic communication had transformed what could have been a routine formal dinner into a historic moment of international cooperation. The aftermath of that historic evening unfolded with unprecedented speed in the world of international diplomacy. Within 72 hours, secure communications between Valdoria, China, Russia, and France had established the framework for what would become known as the Valdoria Accords. The preliminary agreements reached through dining protocol had created such momentum that formal ratification processes, typically requiring months or years, were completed within 6 weeks. Each government recognized that the innovative approach to territorial dispute resolution offered benefits that extended far beyond the immediate resource access. Mrs. Blackwood found herself at the center of a diplomatic revolution she had never anticipated. Her detailed documentation of the evening's protocol communications became the foundation for a new field of study: encoded diplomatic negotiation. Universities across Europe began offering specialized courses in royal communication methods, recognizing that Queen Isabella's techniques represented a sophisticated alternative to traditional treaty negotiations. The Palace of Valdoria received requests from diplomatic schools worldwide seeking training in these ancient but, suddenly, relevant communication skills. The implementation of the Territorial Management Agreement proceeded with remarkable smoothness, largely due to the thorough groundwork laid during the Brandy Service negotiations. The joint scientific committees established in Phase 1 began operations within 3 months, with researchers from all 4 nations collaborating on sustainable extraction techniques that exceeded even the most optimistic environmental protection projections. The careful balance between resource development and ecological preservation became a model for similar projects across multiple continents. Ambassador Chen returned to Beijing as a celebrated diplomatic innovator whose acceptance of the Queen's proposal had secured China's access to critical rare earth minerals while establishing new standards for international cooperation. His willingness to exceed negotiating authority based on confidence in the proposal's merit became a case study in diplomatic courage taught in foreign service academies around the world. The technological advantages gained through participation in the Valdoria Accords enhanced China's position in global markets while demonstrating the benefits of multilateral resource management. The rotating administrative authority system outlined in Phase 2 of the Queen's plan proved even more successful than anticipated. Each nation's 5-year management period allowed for different approaches to territorial development while maintaining consistent environmental and social protection standards. Russia's emphasis on technological innovation during its first administrative term resulted in extraction efficiency improvements that benefited all participating nations. France's focus on sustainable development during its period created long-term environmental protections that became permanent features of the territorial management framework. Ambassador Volkov's careful negotiation of modified oversight mechanisms during the Brandy Service proved crucial to Russia's successful participation in the agreement. The sovereignty protections he secured allowed Moscow to maintain strategic flexibility while benefiting from international cooperation and resource access. His diplomatic skills were recognized through promotion to Deputy Foreign Minister, with special responsibility for innovative diplomatic approaches to territorial and resource disputes worldwide. Prince Alexander's observation of the evening's negotiations profoundly influenced his own approach to royal diplomacy. When he assumed greater responsibilities in international relations, his mastery of the communication methods he had witnessed that night enabled him to facilitate similar agreements involving water rights, fishing territories, and mineral extraction across 3 different continents. The diplomatic legacy of his mother's innovation extended through multiple generations of royal involvement in international conflict resolution. Ambassador Du Bois returned to Paris with enhanced reputation for diplomatic innovation that led to her appointment as France's chief negotiator for international environmental agreements. Her enthusiasm for the Val d'Oria Accord's environmental protection measures influenced French policy on climate change, resource management, and sustainable development for decades. The diplomatic capital gained through her participation in the historic agreement supported France's leadership role in international environmental protection initiatives. The success of the Val d'Oria Accords inspired similar applications of dining protocol diplomacy to other international disputes. Queen Isabella received requests to facilitate negotiations involving territorial conflicts in Southeast Asia, resource disputes in Africa, and fishing rights controversies in the North Atlantic. Her willingness to share knowledge of these ancient communication methods, while maintaining appropriate respect for their traditional origins, helped resolve conflicts that had resisted conventional diplomatic approaches for decades. The economic benefits of the Territorial Management Agreement exceeded all original projections within 5 years of implementation. The collaborative approach to resource extraction, combined with innovative environmental protection measures, created new industries and technological developments that provided benefits to all participating nations. The revenue-sharing mechanisms negotiated through dessert wine selections during the historic dinner proved perfectly balanced, ensuring that each nation received benefits proportional to their contributions while maintaining incentives for continued cooperation. Mrs. Blackwood's documentation of the evening's communications became the foundation for the Val d'Oria Institute for Diplomatic Innovation, established to teach advanced communication methods to international negotiators. Her insights into the practical application of ancient protocols to modern challenges attracted students from every major diplomatic service worldwide. The Institute's graduates became known for their ability to facilitate agreements in situations where traditional negotiation methods had failed. The environmental protection measures established through the Val d'Oria Accords became the global standard for sustainable resource extraction. The careful balance between economic development and ecological preservation that Queen Isabella had outlined through culinary metaphors during the historic dinner influenced international environmental law and treaty frameworks worldwide. The success of these measures in the Val d'Orian territories provided concrete evidence that economic and environmental interests could be effectively balanced through appropriate international cooperation. The technological innovations resulting from international collaboration in the Val d'Orian territories revolutionized resource extraction techniques across multiple industries. The joint research committees established through the Queen's proposal developed new methods for mineral processing, environmental monitoring, and ecological restoration that were adopted by resource companies worldwide. These innovations demonstrated that cooperative international development could produce technological advances impossible through individual national efforts. Ambassador Chen's career trajectory following the Val d'Oria negotiations established him as one of China's most influential diplomatic voices in international resource management. His expertise in protocol communication and innovative negotiation techniques led to his appointment as China's chief representative to the United Nations Committee on Sustainable Development. His influence helped establish international standards for cooperative resource management that reflected the principles pioneered in the Val d'Orian Agreement. The diplomatic techniques demonstrated during Queen Isabella's historic dinner influenced international relations far beyond the specific territorial dispute they were designed to address. The success of encoded communication through formal dining protocols encouraged experimentation with other traditional diplomatic methods that had been largely abandoned in favor of modern negotiation techniques. Cultural ceremonies, artistic presentations, and historical commemorations began to be recognized as sophisticated venues for international communication and problem-solving. The rotation of administrative authority among participating nations created unexpected opportunities for cultural exchange and technological transfer that strengthened relationships between the countries involved. Citizens from China, Russia, and France working in the Val d'Orian territories during their nation's administrative periods developed personal and professional connections that supported continued cooperation long after their official assignments concluded. These human relationships proved as valuable as the formal diplomatic agreements in ensuring the long-term success of the territorial management framework. Queen Isabella's legacy as a diplomatic innovator influenced royal families across Europe and beyond to develop their own expertise in sophisticated communication methods. The success of the Val d'Oria Accords demonstrated that monarchical institutions could play crucial roles in modern international relations through their unique combination of traditional authority and diplomatic flexibility. This recognition led to renewed respect for royal diplomacy as a complement to conventional government negotiation methods. The final assessment of the Valdoria Accords, conducted 10 years after that historic dinner, confirmed that Queen Isabella's innovative approach to international negotiation had created lasting benefits for all participating nations while establishing new standards for diplomatic communication and conflict resolution. The territorial management framework had evolved and adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining the fundamental principles of cooperation, sustainability, and mutual respect that had been established through dining protocol negotiations. The pearl bracelet adjustment that had signaled the beginning of that extraordinary evening had indeed changed the course of history. The silent language of royal diplomacy, demonstrated with such mastery during a single dinner, had proven its relevance to modern international challenges while preserving the wisdom and sophistication of centuries of diplomatic tradition. In a world often characterized by conflict and confrontation, the Valdoria Accords stood as proof that cooperation and innovation could overcome even the most challenging territorial and resource disputes through skillful application of diplomatic artistry and mutual respect.